again, because Russia's forces, in some ways, they're in disarray. They've underperformed. They're 300,000 strong, and yet they're not able to deal very effectively with the Ukrainians. So they have to pursue other tactics. I mean, these are the type of tactics that you see terrorist organizations using. Well, they're going after civilians. So it's often a part of asymmetric warfare where you are the weaker entity, and so you have to go after civilians to create fear, terror. It's part of psychological warfare, of course. And so we're seeing that the Russians are having to resort to these types of tactics because a lot of the conventional military operations have not been going very well.
Yeah. And of course, targeting Zelensky's hometown, I imagine they're wanting to send some sort of message to the president.
Yeah, again, this is another part of this psychological warfare because things aren't going well for them, that they're trying to intimidate Zelensky. And that's what initially they thought that they could do when they went into Kyiv at the start of the operation last year, that Zelensky would fold and would capitulate, and that this would be rather easy. So this is all part of this intimidation strategy.
In the meantime, Ukraine's long-awaited counteroffensive has begun. What do you make of their progress so far?
So this is an incredibly difficult tactical operation of engaging in this offensive against an enemy that has been preparing for months for it, and also given the fact that the Ukrainians lack air superiority. So what we're hearing from the Ukrainians is that they've been able to take 4 villages. These are very small villages, all in the Donetsk region. And the Ukrainian military has reported that there are 25 battles taking place, also all in the Donetsk region. But there's been some setbacks in the Zaporizhia region where they have lost some armored vehicles. And so it's slow going. They're hoping to regain some of the lost territory. But as Zelensky had said, this is going to lead to many people losing their lives. There's going to be high casualties on both sides, but definitely on the Russian side, which has already experienced many high casualties. I mean, just as since December, 20,000 Russians have been killed. And so we're seeing a long slog ahead. The Ukrainians, of course, have been very careful to not broadcast that this offensive was taking place, but it looks like, they've made a huge effort along this 600-mile front that they're trying to penetrate.
Now, as you point out, there's been these sort of small towns recaptured. Do you think Mariupol is their ultimate goal in this particular offensive?
It could be. I mean, I would think that that's one of many goals of not just capturing such a highly significant location where so many people lost their lives, but they're trying to push back on the Russians the best that they can. Now, they've been themselves hampered by Russian tactics of destroying dams, the most recent one last week, but that's actually slowed down their offensive. The Ukrainians have claimed another dam has been damaged, which has caused flooding and havoc and made it more difficult for them to advance. So the Ukrainians are facing huge obstacles along the way, and I'm sure that they have many goals in trying to recapture what they had lost in the east.
Yeah. You talk about the sort of disarray on the Russian side. There's this idea that all Russian volunteer formations have to sign contracts with the ministry, the Russian ministry, by the beginning of next month. What is their aim with this? Who are they targeting?
They were trying to target the founder of the Wagner Group, Yevgeny Prigozhin, who is at odds with the Russian defense minister, Sergei Shoigu, at the moment. Prigozhin has actually been very vocal about the fact that the Russians have not provided them with proper ammunition, with weapons, with proper supplies, and that they're unable, the Russians are unable to just even manage their own military formations. So he's been highly critical of this, and he sees this as a maneuver by the Russian defense minister to try to get control over him and his group. And because there are so many different mercenaries and different groups, some of them Chechen special forces that have signed on or have agreed agreed to sign on. It is complete chaos, and Russia is trying to get control over this. But clearly, because they've had such poor military training, they're not able to gain the trust and legitimacy of some of these smaller actors that are trying to fight under the Russian umbrella.
Yeah. What would Russia's operations look like without the Wagner Group that have actually made some devastating but small gains?
I think it would just be even worse off than it is already, because the Russian military has no morale. They don't know what they're fighting for. They're really poorly trained. They're very poorly paid, poorly fed, poorly armed. And they're out there not really understanding what the purpose is. They don't have anywhere near the same drive that the Ukrainians do. And so that's when, weak militaries need to rely on mercenaries who they think are going to be better trained and better able to make some kind of inroads here.
Yeah. To that point about the morale of the Russian troops, do you think you might see, with Ukraine's advances, Russian troops actually just moving out, or do you think you'll see some form of resistance?
That's really a good question. It's hard to know. I mean, we've actually seen a lot of defection or desertion from the Russian military. There's a history of that when things aren't going well. This has happened in Afghanistan before, and it's been hard to justify for them why they are fighting there. What are they doing? Many of them are just afraid for their own lives. So we see a high level of deserters. It may snowball where they start to see that it's just not going to happen, that they're not going to be able to survive by staying on the Russian side, and we may see a tipping point happens. But thus far, we haven't seen enough of a tipping point that would lead to complete collapse of the Russian military.
Yeah. All right. It remains one of these really protracted and devastating battles, as you say. Good to talk as always, Natasha. Thank you so much.
Nice talking to you, too.